Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to the slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a purely listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools I use, and justify the time that I use on it thanks to the generosity and support of listeners like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night and you would like to keep it going out to thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're interested. And if monthly is a big ask, you can make one-off tips to the tip jar on the website. And if you'd like to support the show without having to do so financially, you can just tell people about it. If you know someone struggling to sleep and you think it'll benefit them, just tell them where to find it and we'll go from there. Anyway, that's enough of that. We're going to pick up now, right before a very important selection. We return this week to The Last Man by Mary Shelley. One moment we seized before our departure to take leave of our beloved girls. I had small hope of success and entreated Idris to watch over my sister. As I approached the latter, she seized my hand and drew me into another apartment. She threw herself into my arms and wept and sobbed bitterly and long. I tried to soothe her. I bade her hope. I asked what tremendous consequences would ensue even on our failure. My brother, she cried, protector of my childhood, dear, most dear Lionel, my fate hangs by a thread. I have you all about me now, you, the companion of my infancy, Adrian, as dear to me as if bound by the ties of blood, Idris, the sister of my heart and her lovely offspring. This, oh, this may be the last time that you will surround me thus. Abruptly she stopped and then cried. What have I said, foolish false girl that I am? She looked wildly on me and then, suddenly calming herself, apologized for what she called her unmeaning words, saying that she must indeed be insane. For while Raymond lived, she must be happy. And then, though she still wept, she suffered me tranquilly to depart. Raymond only took her hand when he went, and looked on her expressively. She answered by a look of intelligence and assent. Poor girl, what she then suffered. I could never entirely forgive Raymond for the trials he imposed on her, occasioned as they were by a selfish feeling on his part. He had schemed, if he failed in his present attempt, without taking leave of any of us, to embark for Greece and never again to revisit England. Perdita acceded to his wishes, for his contentment was the chief object of her life, the crown of her enjoyment. But to leave us all, her companions, the beloved partners of her happiest years, and in the interim to conceal this frightful determination was a task that almost conquered her strength of mind. She had been employed in arranging for their departure. She had promised Raymond during this decisive evening to take advantage of our absence, to go one stage of the journey, and he, after his defeat was ascertained, would slip away from us and join her. Although, when I was informed of this scheme, I was bitterly offended by the small attention which Raymond paid to my sister's feelings. I was led by reflection to consider that he acted under the force of such strong excitement as to take from him the consciousness, and consequently the guilt of a fault. If he had permitted us to witness his agitation, he would have been more under the guidance of reason, but his struggles for the show of composure acted with such violence on his nerves as to destroy his power of self-command. I am convinced that, at the worst, he would have returned from the seashore to take leave of us, and to make us the partners of his council. But the task imposed on Perdita was not the less painful. He had extorted from her a vow of secrecy, and her part of the drama, since it was to be performed alone, was the most agonizing that could be devised. But to return to my narrative. The debates had hitherto been long and loud. They had often been protracted merely for the sake of delay. But now each seemed fearful lest the fateful moment should pass, while the choice was yet undecided. Unwonted silence reigned in the house. The members spoke in whispers, and the ordinary business was transacted with celerity and quietness. During the first stage of the election, the Duke had been thrown out. The question therefore lay between Lord Raymond and Mr. Ryland. The latter had felt secure of victory until the appearance of Raymond, and since his name had been inserted as a candidate, he had canvassed with eagerness. He had appeared each evening, impatience and anger marked in his looks, scowling on us from the opposite side of St. Stephen's, as if his mere frown would cast eclipse on our hopes. Everything in the English Constitution had been regulated for the better preservation of peace. On the last day, 2 candidates only were allowed to remain, and to obviate, if possible, the last struggle between these, a bribe was offered to him who should voluntarily resign his pretensions. The place of great emolument and honor was given him, and his success facilitated at a future election. Strange to say, however, no instance had yet occurred where either candidate had had recourse to this expedient. In consequence, the law had become obsolete, nor had been referred to by any of us in our discussions. To our extreme surprise, when it was moved that we should resolve ourselves into a committee for the election of the Lord Protector, the member who had nominated Ryland rose and informed us that this candidate had resigned his pretensions. His information was at first received with silence. A confused murmur succeeded, and, when the chairman declared Lord Raymond duly chosen, it amounted to a shout of applause and victory. It seemed as if, far from any dread of defeat, even if Mr. Ryland had not resigned, every voice would have been united in favor of our candidate. In fact, now that the idea of contest was dismissed, all hearts returned to their former respect and admiration of our accomplished friend. Each felt that England had never seen a protector so capable of fulfilling the arduous duties of that high office. One voice made of many voices resounded through the chamber. It syllabled the name of Raymond. He entered. I was on one of the highest seats and saw him walk up the passage to the table of the speaker. The native modesty of his disposition conquered the joy of his triumph. He looked round timidly. A mist seemed before his eyes. Adrian, who was beside me, hastened to him, and jumping down the benches, was at his side in a moment. His appearance reanimated our friend, and when he came to speak and act, his hesitation vanished, and he shone out supreme in majesty and victory. The former protector tendered him the oaths and presented him with the insignia of office, performing the ceremonies of installation. The House then dissolved. The chief members of the state crowded round the new magistrate and conducted him to the palace of government. Adrian suddenly vanished, and by the time that Raymond's supporters were reduced to our intimate friends merely, returned leading Idris to congratulate her friend on his success. But where was Perdita? In securing solicitously an unobserved retreat in case of failure, Raymond had forgotten to arrange the mode by which she was to hear of his success, and she had been much too agitated to revert to this circumstance. When Idris entered, so far had Raymond forgotten himself that he asked for my sister. One word, which told of her mysterious disappearance, recalled him. Adrian, it is true, had already gone to seek the fugitive, imagining that her tameless anxiety had led her to the purlieus of the house, and that some sinister event detained her. But Raymond, without explaining himself, suddenly quitted us, and in another moment we heard him gallop down the street, in spite of the wind and rain that scattered tempest over the earth. We did not know how far he had to go, and soon separated, supposing that in a short time he would return to the palace with Perdita, and that they would not be sorry to find themselves alone. Perdita had arrived with her child at Dartford, weeping and inconsolable. She directed everything to be prepared for the continuance of their journey, and, placing her lovely sleeping charge on a bed, passed several hours in acute suffering. Sometimes she observed the war of elements, thinking that they also declared against her, and listened to the pattering of the rain in gloomy despair. Sometimes she hung over her child, tracing her resemblance to the father, and fearful lest in afterlife she should display the same passions and uncontrollable impulses that rendered him unhappy. Again, with a gush of pride and delight, she marked in the features of her little girl the same smile of beauty that often irradiated Raymond's countenance. The sight of it soothed her. She thought of the treasure she possessed in the affections of her lord, of his accomplishments surpassing those of his contemporaries, his genius, his devotion to her. Soon she thought that all she possessed in the world, except him, might well be spared, nay, given with delight, a propitiatory offering to secure the supreme good she retained in him. Soon she imagined that fate demanded this sacrifice from her. As a mark she was devoted to Raymond, and that it must be made with cheerfulness. She figured to herself their life in the Greek isle he had selected for their retreat, her task of soothing him, her cares for the beauteous Clara, her rides in his company, her dedication of herself to his consolation. The picture then presented itself to her in such glowing colors that she feared the reverse, and a life of magnificence and power in London, where Raymond would no longer be hers only, nor she the sole source of happiness to him. So far as she merely was concerned, she began to hope for defeat, and was only on his account that her feelings vacillated as she heard him gallop into the courtyard of the inn. That he came to her alone, weighted by the storm, careless of everything except speed. What else could it mean than that, vanquished and solitary, they were to take their way from native England, the scene of shame, and hide themselves in the myrtle groves of the Grecian Isles. In a moment she was in his arms. The knowledge of his success had become so much a part of himself that he forgot that it was necessary to impart it to his companion. She only felt in his embrace a dear assurance that while he possessed her, he would not despair. "This is kind," she cried. "This is noble, my own beloved. Oh, fear not disgrace or lowly fortune. While you have your Perdita, fear not sorrow, while our child lives and smiles. Let us go even where you will. The love that accompanies us will prevent our regrets." Locked in his embrace, she spoke thus, and cast back her head, seeking an assent to her words in his eyes. They were sparkling with ineffable delight. "Why, my little lady protectress," said he playfully, "what is this you say? And what pretty scheme have you woven of exile and obscurity? While a brighter web, a golden woven tissue, is that which, in truth, you ought to contemplate." He kissed her brow. But the wayward girl, half sorry at his triumph, agitated by swift change of thought, hid her face in his bosom and wept. He comforted her, instilled into her his own hopes and desires, and soon her countenance beamed with sympathy. How very happy were they that night! How full even to bursting was their sense of joy! Chapter 7. Having seen our friend properly installed in his new office, we turned our eyes towards Windsor. The nearness of this place to London was such as to take away the idea of painful separation when we quitted Raymond and Perdita. We took leave of them in the Protectorial Palace. It was pretty enough to see my sister enter, as it were, to the spirit of the drama, and endeavour to fill her station with becoming dignity. Her internal pride and humility of manner were now more than ever at war. Her timidity was not artificial, but arose from that fear of not being properly appreciated, that slight estimation of the neglect of the world, which also characterized Raymond. But then Perdita thought more constantly of others than he, and part of her bashfulness arose from a wish to take from those around her a sense of inferiority, a feeling which never crossed her mind. From the circumstances of her birth and education, Idris would have been better fitted for the formulae of ceremony, but the very ease which accompanied such actions with her, arising from habit, rendered them tedious. While with every drawback, Perdita evidently enjoyed her situation. She was too full of new ideas to feel much pain when we departed. She took an affectionate leave of us and promised to visit us soon. But she did not regret the circumstances that caused our separation. The spirits of Raymond were unbounded. He did not know what to do with his new god power. His head was full of plans. He had as yet decided on none, but he promised himself, his friends, and the world that the era of his protectorship would be signalized by some act of surpassing glory. Thus we talked of them and moralized, as with diminished numbers we returned to Windsor Castle. We felt extreme delight at our escape from political turmoil, and sought our solitude with redoubled zest. We did not want for occupation, but my eager disposition was now turned to the field of intellectual exertion only, and hard study I found to be an excellent medicine to allay a fever of spirit, with which in indolence I should doubtless have been assailed. Perdita had permitted us to take Clara back with us to Windsor, and she and my two lovely infants were perpetual sources of interest and amusement. The only circumstance that disturbed our peace was the health of Adrian. It evidently declined, without any symptom which could lead us to suspect his disease. unless indeed his brightened eyes, animated look, and flustering cheeks made us dread consumption. But he was without pain or fear. He betook himself to books with ardour, and reposed from study in the society he best loved, that of his sister and myself. Sometimes he went up to London to visit Raymond and watch the progress of events. Clara often accompanied him in these excursions, partly that she might see her parents, mostly because Adrian delighted in the prattle and intelligent looks of this lovely child. Meanwhile, all went on well in London. The new elections were finished, Parliament met, and Raymond was occupied in 1,000 beneficial schemes. Canals, aqueducts, bridges, stately buildings, and various edifices for public utility were entered upon. He was continually surrounded by projectors and projects, which were to render England one scene of fertility and magnificence. The state of poverty was to be abolished. Men were to be transported from place to place, almost with the same facility as the Princess Hussein, Ali, and Ahmed in the Arabian Nights. The physical state of man would soon not yield to the beatitude of angels. Disease was to be banished, labor lightened of its heaviest burden. Nor did this seem extravagant. The arts of life and the discoveries of science had augmented in a ratio which left all calculation behind. Food sprung up, so to say, spontaneously. Machines existed to supply with facility every want of the population. An evil direction still survived, and men were not happy, not because they could not, but because they would not rouse themselves to vanquish self-raised obstacles. Raymond was to inspire them with his beneficial will and the mechanism of society. Once systematized according to faultless rules, would never again swerve into disorder. For these hopes he abandoned his long-cherished ambition of being enregistered in the annals of nations as a successful warrior. Laying aside his sword, peace and its enduring glories became his aim. The title he coveted was that of the benefactor of his country. Among other works of art in which he engaged, he had projected the erection of a natural gallery for statues and pictures. He possessed many himself, which he designed to present to the Republic, and as the edifice was to be the great ornament of his protectorship, he was very fastidious in his choice of the plan on which it would be built. Hundreds were brought to him and rejected. He sent even to Italy and Greece for drawings. But as the design was to be characterized by originality as well as by perfect beauty, his endeavors were for a time without avail. At length, a drawing came, with an address where communications might be sent and no artist's name affixed. The design was new and elegant, but faulty. So faulty that although drawn with the hand and eye of taste, it was evidently the work of one who is not an architect. Raymond contemplated it with delight. The more he gazed, the more pleased he was, and yet the errors multiplied under inspection. He wrote to the address given, desiring to see the draftsman, that such alterations might be made, as should be suggested in a consultation between him and the original conceiver. A Greek came, a middle-aged man with some intelligence of manner, but so commonplace a physiognomy that Raymond could scarcely believe that he was the designer. He acknowledged that he was not an architect, but the idea of the building had struck him, though he had sent it without the smallest hope of it being accepted. He was a man of few words. Raymond questioned him, but his reserved answers soon made him turn from the man to the drawing. He pointed out the errors and the alterations that he wished to be made. He offered the Greek a pencil that he might correct the sketch on the spot. This was refused by his visitor, who said that he perfectly understood and would work at it at home. At length Raymond suffered him to depart. The next day he returned. The design had been redrawn, but many defects still remained, and several of the instructions given had been misunderstood. "Come," said Raymond, "I yielded to you yesterday. Now comply with my request. Take the pencil." The Greek took it, but he handled it in no artist-like way. At length he said, "I must confess to you, my lord, that I did not make this drawing. It is impossible for you to see the real designer, for instructions must pass through me. Condescend therefore to have patience with my ignorance, and to explain your wishes to me. In time I am certain that you will be satisfied." Raymond questioned vainly. The mysterious Greek would say no more. Would an architect be permitted to see the artist? This also was refused. Raymond repeated his instructions, and the visitor retired. Our friend resolved, however, not to be foiled in his wish. He suspected that unaccustomed poverty was the cause of the mystery, and that the artist was unwilling to be seen in the garb and abode of want. Raymond was only the more excited by this consideration to discover him. Impelled by the interest he took in obscure talent, he therefore ordered a person skilled in such matters to follow the Greek the next time he came, and observe the house in which he should enter. His emissary obeyed and brought the desired intelligence. He had traced the man to one of the most penurious streets in the metropolis. Raymond did not wonder that thus situated, the artist had shrunk from notice, but he did not for this alter his resolve. On the same evening he went alone to the house named to him. Poverty, dirt, and squalid misery characterized its appearance. Alas, thought Raymond, I have much to do before England becomes a paradise. He knocked. The door was opened by a string from above. The broken, wretched staircase was immediately before him, but no person appeared. He knocked again, vainly, and then, impatient of further delay, he ascended the dark, creaking stairs. His main wish, more particularly now that he had witnessed the abject dwelling of the artist, was to relieve one possessed of such talent, but depressed by want. He pictured to himself a youth, whose eyes sparkled with genius, whose person was attenuated by famine. He half feared to displease him, but he trusted that his generous kindness would be administered so delicately as not to excite repulse. What human heart is shut to kindness? And though poverty, in its excess, might render the sufferer unapt to submit to the supposed degradation of a benefit, the zeal of the benefactor must at last relax him into thankfulness. These thoughts encouraged Raymond as he stood at the door of the highest room of the house. After trying vainly to enter the other apartments, he perceived just within the threshold of this one a small pair of Turkish slippers. The door was ajar, but all was silent within. It was probable that the inmate was absent, but secure that he had found the right person, our adventurous protector was tempted to enter, to leave a purse on the table and silently depart. In pursuance of this idea, he pushed open the door gently, but the room was inhabited. Raymond had never visited the dwellings of want, and the scene that now presented itself struck him to the heart. The floor was sunk in many places, the walls ragged and bare, the ceiling weather-stained. A tattered bed stood in the corner. There were but 2 chairs in the room and a rough broken table, on which was a light in a tin candlestick. And yet in the midst of such drear and heart-sickening poverty, there was an air of order and cleanliness that surprised him. The thought was fleeting, for his attention was instantly drawn towards the inhabitant of this wretched abode. It was a female. She sat at the table. One small hand shaded her eyes from the candle. The other held a pencil. Her looks were fixed on a drawing before her, which Raymond recognized as the design presented to him. Her whole appearance awakened his deepest interest. Her dark hair was braided and twined in thick knots like the headdress of a Grecian statue. Her garb was mean, but her attitude might have been selected as a model of grace. Raymond had a confused remembrance that he had seen such a form before as he walked across the room. She did not raise her eyes, merely asking in Romaic, "Who is there?" "A friend," replied Raymond in the same dialect. She looked up wondering, and he saw that it was Evadne's Amy. Evadne, once the idol of Adrian's affections, and who for the sake of her present visitor had disdained the noble youth, and then neglected by him she loved, with crushed hopes and a stinging sense of misery, had returned to her native Greece. What revolution of fortune could have brought her to England and housed her thus? Raymond recognized her, and his manner changed from polite beneficence to the warmest protestations of kindness and sympathy. The sight of her, in his present situation, passed like an arrow into his soul. He sat by her, he took her hand, and said 1,000 things which breathed the deepest spirit of compassion and affection. Evadne did not answer. Her large dark eyes were cast down. At length a tear glimmered on the lashes. Thus she cried, "Kindness can do what no want, no misery has ever effected. I weep." She shed indeed many tears. Her head sunk unconsciously onto the shoulder of Raymond. He held her hand. He kissed her sunken, tear-stained cheek. He told her that his sufferings were now over. No one possessed the art of consoling like Raymond. He did not reason or declaim, but his look shone with sympathy. He brought pleasant images before the sufferer. His caresses excited no distrust, for they arose purely from the feeling which leads a mother to kiss her wounded child. A desire to demonstrate in every possible way the truth of his feelings, and the keenness of his wish to pour balm into the lacerated mind of the unfortunate. As Evadne regained her composure, his manner became even more gay. He sported with the idea of her poverty. Something told him it was not its real evils that lay heavily at her heart, but the debasement and disgrace attendant on it. As he talked, he divested it of these, sometimes speaking of her fortitude with energetic praise. Then, alluding to her past state, he called her his princess in disguise. He made her warm offers of service. She was too much occupied by more engrossing thoughts, either to accept or reject them. At length he left her, making a promise to repeat his visit the next day. He returned home, full of mingled feelings, of pain excited by Evadne's wretchedness, and pleasure at the prospect of relieving it. Some motive for which he did not account, even to himself, prevented him from relating his adventure to Perdita. The next day he threw such disguise over his person as a cloak afforded, and visited Evadne. As he went, he brought a basket of costly fruits, such as were natives of her own country, and throwing over these various beautiful flowers, bore it himself to the miserable garret of his friend. "Behold," cried he as he entered, "what bird's food I have brought for my sparrow on the housetop." Evadne now related the tale of her misfortunes. Her father, though of high rank, had in the end dissipated his fortune, and even destroyed his reputation and influence through a course of dissolute indulgence. His health was impaired beyond hope of a cure, and it became his earnest wish before he died to preserve his daughter from the poverty which would be the portion of her orphan state. He therefore accepted for her and persuaded her to accede to a proposal of marriage from a wealthy Greek merchant settled at Constantinople. She quitted her native Greece. Her father died. By degrees she was cut off from all the companions and ties of her youth. The war, which about a year before the present time had broken out between Greece and Turkey, brought about many reverses of fortune. Her husband became bankrupt, and then in a tumult and threatened massacre on the part of the Turks, they were obliged to fly at midnight, and reached in an open boat an English vessel under sail, which had brought them immediately to this island. The few jewels they had saved supported them a while. The whole strength of Evadne's mind was exerted to support the failing spirits of her husband. Loss of property, hopelessness as to his future prospects, then an occupation to which poverty condemned him, combined to reduce him to a state bordering on insanity. 5 months after their arrival in England, he committed suicide. You will ask me, continued Evadne, what I have done since, why I have not applied for the succor to the rich Greeks resident here, why I have not returned to my native country. My answer to these questions must needs appear to you unsatisfactory, yet they have sufficed to lead me on, day after day, enduring every wretchedness rather than by such means to seek relief. Shall the daughter of the noble, the prodigal Zamy, appear a beggar before her compeers or inferiors? Superiors she had none. Shall I bow my head before them, and with servile gestures sell my nobility for life? Had I a child or any tie to bind me to existence, I might descend to this. But as it is, the world has been to me a harsh stepmother. Fain would I leave the abode she seems to grudge, and in the grave forget my pride, my struggles, my despair. The time will soon come. Grief and famine have already sapped the foundations of my being. A very short time and I shall have passed away, unstained by the crime of self-destruction, unstung by the memory of degradation. My spirit will throw aside the miserable coil and find such recompense as fortitude and resignation may deserve. This may seem madness to you, yet you also have pride and resolution. Do not then wonder that my pride is tameless, my resolution unalterable. And at the end of that monologue seems like a good place to leave it. You can, as always, find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.